Just Fix It in Post is fueled by the donut. Whether you're law enforcement doubling down on tradition, a multitasking parent seeking some sweet silence, or producer looking for a morale boost on set, get the donut. For the sweetest updates, you can follow them on Instagram at The Donut San Pedro. Located at 1615 South Daffy Street, 562-881-0656. Get The Donut. Serving San Pedro for the last 45 years. The Donut. Damn, that's good. Just Fix It in Post.
Okay, this is a career.
He's like creative director's an approach.
Wow.
Fucking A. I am absolutely there.
Clients wanting more for less.
Dude.
This mix of creativity and technology.
We've heard around the world. People were freaking out.
Welcome to Just Fix It in Post. Industry insights straight from the source. I'm your host, Sean Rice, and welcome. If you've ever wanted to know the real stories behind the world of motorsports, get ready because we're joined by someone who lives and breathes cars, bikes, and everything in between. As the senior features editor at Car and Driver and a seasoned writer for Roadkill and Hot Rod magazine, she's covered it all. From the roar of the racetrack to the quiet art of the perfectly tuned engine. And when she's not writing about cars, she's busy collecting and wrenching on them. From classic Thunderbirds to obscure models you didn't even know existed, she's got a garage that's as impressive as her stories. Let's give a warm welcome to Elana Scherr. So thank you for making that ridiculous drive out here. I really appreciate that. I'm so excited to have you on because you're special in your industry and you're the closest thing I know to a rock star. So
oh my goodness. Are we gonna talk about making art for money? That's what we're talking about today, right?
I mean, that's essentially why we're all here, right?
Yeah.
I have no idea how you got into what you're doing. So go ahead and give me the...
I could tell you. I mean, it's a little bit of a long story. So I'll try and make it short. And then if you want to know more about it, we can go back. I had no intention of doing what I'm doing. I mean, I didn't even like cars as a kid. I didn't grow up in a car family. My current family members all drive sensible, fuel efficient, safe automobiles. They avoid driving whenever they can. I didn't even watch racing, I thought I'd be like a veterinarian or something like that. When I finally learned how to drive, I should mention, I didn't get a driver's license till 21. So yeah, all of those stories that you normally hear when somebody's talking about being a race car driver or writing about cars or working in the automotive industry where they're like, yeah, and I had a Hot Wheels as a baby and I told my first words were, big block or something like that. That is not the case here. But once I learned how to drive, it was like going to a party and seeing someone across the room and falling in love instantly. Like I was like, why did I not do this sooner? This is the best feeling. Like having this sort of freedom to move myself through the world at a much faster pace. And then because I had bought a classic car at the time, it was a classic car. It was still an old car. It wasn't a particularly expensive or awesome car. It was within my budget. It was like a 70s Plymouth. I had to learn how to fix it immediately, right? Like before I could even legally drive it, I was wrenching on it with the help of quite a few very generous neighbors and sort of pals in the community who were into cars, and a complete change in how I viewed my life and what I thought I would do with it. Once I was working on cars, I was like, I want to keep being around cars. I like these people. I like this feeling. I like learning something, and there's so much to learn, right? And then I got into watching racing, and then I got into doing some racing, and then I met more people who were into cars. The whole time, what could I do that would be a career, right? Like how can I do this all the time, not just as a hobby? And I tried a couple of different things. I worked at a motorcycle race shop. I did composite work, making carbon fiber. I worked in marketing and PR. But the whole time I was reading car magazines and watching car videos. And I was like, man, that looks so fun. because we get to do the best part of all of the other jobs. Like if you're a race car driver, that's a really cool job. It's really stressful and it's really dangerous. If you write about race car drivers, you get to go on track pretty often and you get to go to all the races and you get to be in the garage, but you're not responsible for anything. You don't have to find the sponsorship. You don't have to safely make it through the race. You just get to be there and have all that energy, and you write it up later and everyone's excited about it. And the same with being a mechanic. That's a lot of work. It's physically demanding. You need a lot of strength. But if you're just writing about how other people build cars, you get to hang out in the garage. Maybe you like hand them a part or a tool and you feel all a part of it. But really, it's not your responsibility to successfully make the car run. You just tell other people how it was done. And I loved that. And I thought that sounds so fun. How do you do it, right? Like, how do you get that kind of job? And I tried a lot. Every time I would see an opening, I'd send in a sample writing, or, I'd try to meet the editors who were in charge of the magazines. And I would say there was probably 10 years of trying to get something published. And when I was in PR and marketing, I got to know some of the editors better, and I met David Freiberger, who at the time was the editor-in-chief of Hot Rod magazine.
Oh, damn.
And they had an opening. I mean, this has really been the case ever since then, which is that you can apply to all the jobs in the world cold, but if you know someone who can sort of make sure that your resume gets looked at, that's every job I've ever had since then has been because of something like that. So I think that making real life human contacts is unbelievably important, whatever it is that you want to do. So I knew Freiberger, and I know him well, but I knew him well enough to say, I see you have a job opening. I am interested in this job. Do you think there's any possibility that I would be considered for it? And he blew my mind because he said, I was actually thinking you'd be perfect for it. Please apply. And I applied. And it was still a long time. It was probably 6 months from applying to getting the call. I still remember it. It was a Friday afternoon. He calls me. I was outside in the backyard. And he's like, you think you'd still have any interest in that job? And I was like, yes. Like, I didn't ask how much it paid. Didn't ask anything. I was just like, yes, I want that job. So that was, I don't know, maybe around 2012. 2012. The industry is not a stable industry. It's you're very lucky if you get to spend any considerable time at one outlet. I got to spend a good long time at Hot Rod. I got to work with David when he started Roadkill with Mike Finnegan. I did some time in freelance after that, and I am currently a senior features editor at Car and Driver. So
where were you throughout this? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Los Angeles. So I've been here my whole life. I went to school in LA. As a car person, there are very few places that are better to be.
Right. Because everybody has. I feel like I see more Porsches out here. When I was lucky enough to have one during that time, actually, it was like, I feel like, that was like the boom, like right after the housing crisis. Yeah. Everything was back to kind of normal again and people were doing stuff. So as you're growing up, are you writing other things? Is writing something you like doing, or was writing a vehicle to be able to do car stuff?
I've always been a reader. I was not a sporty child. I was a very couch-bound kid, read a lot of books, fiction, nonfiction, magazines. I was very into it. And I always liked writing. I didn't go to school for journalism or for writing, but I did take a lot of writing classes when I was in school. It was never something that was particularly difficult for me to do. I knew the structure of it, even though I hadn't studied it. And I went to school for fine arts. Originally, I wanted to be a painter or a sculptor, like a fine arts painter. I remember my friend Andrew, who I'd known since high school, he was talking to me once and he's like, you're not a bad painter, but you're a much better writer and you should really be a writer. And I was so mad, Sean. I was so mad at him. I was like, who are you to tell me what I'm good at? But he was right, man. I was an okay painter, but pretty good writer.
I feel you on that. It's funny, I tried to get into Art Center College of Design 3 different times as an illustrator, and they were like, no. And then I fell into photography at junior college. I just signed up for the wrong course code. You'd call in, like, put your number in or whatever. I showed up and they're like, where's your camera? And I was like, this is for photography? So I took that and then I was just addicted. It was like, I've always wondered like how you got from a click to like a picture in the dark. And then when you see it come to life, you're like, more.
Yeah, no, it's really incredible when you find something that you are good at already, or that like it hits something that you've got in your core and you're like, I could be even better at this. Yeah, because you can get okay at anything if you work really hard, but it is nice when you're like, I'm gonna be really good at this.
That's cool. So when you get this job as a writer, are you writing down like who you are and who you aren't, like when you write these stories, or like what's kind of the process for you for writing?
I mean, currently, like writing about cars, or initially when I was first starting?
Yeah, at your first gig at Hot Rod.
I'd written quite a lot going into that because I'd been working in PR, and as a PR person, not only are you writing a lot of press releases and other materials, you do a lot of ghostwriting. So I had already been published, just not under my byline, which was maybe one of the impetuses for really pushing myself forward, because I would see my stuff and I would see people like it, except somebody else was getting the credit for it. It was bumming me out. When I first started, I would fully make an outline. Like, do you remember in college or high school where you have to make the, like, what is it, like a 5 outline, like intro, exposition? I don't know. I can't even remember it anymore. That's how important it is.
Right, yeah.
But it was helpful initially, especially when I was at Hot Rod, where there is sort of a formula that you need to hit. Like, people want to know, what are the engine specs? What transmission does it have? What rear end gears does it have? What is the suspension? So you need to get all of that in, as well as saying something about the people who built it and the challenges that they met in building it. I've always really liked history, so if I can work some history in, even with something modern, to kind of connect things through the years, I really like that. I think nothing is free-floating in this world. We're all connected to stuff that happened before, and learning about it, I think, is, I don't know, it gives like a depth to a story.
When you started at Hot Rod, what were the kind of stories you were doing?
Hot Rod is really fun. I covered Pikes Peak. I went to Pikes Peak with a vintage Barracuda. That was this. They don't run vintage cars there anymore, but they had a vintage class at the time. I went with a Barracuda, 71 Barracuda. That was really cool. Covered their whole week there, and fixing the car early in the morning in the dark before the race, and sort of explaining what it's like there on this mountain, and again, talking about history. I'm in that very old race that's been running since the turn of the century, basically. We did a lot of custom car builds where you'd go to the shop, or sometimes you wouldn't even get to see the shop. You'd talk to a person on the phone and work off of photos, or maybe you saw the car at a event like SEMA or a Good Guys event or something like that, and then we'd write about it. We covered a lot of events. Le Mans, I did Baja, Bonneville. I was very into motorsports whenever I could do them. I did a lot of profiles, interviews with people, which was great. Very good practice for learning how to talk to people and also how to listen.
The stuff that I've learned doing this, do you use a recorder when you're interviewing people? Like, tell me, what have you learned from interviewing people? I'd love to hear.
All right. So I have terrible habits now. I was much stricter with myself before, but my ideal setup is I do have a recorder and I also have a notebook. I will take notes as much as I can on what people are saying, because I feel like it makes me think about what they're saying more than just letting a recorder go. And also, recorder doesn't always work, and then it's good if you have something, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that I used to do a lot more, now I don't, because there's much cheaper transcription. Back when transcription was incredibly expensive, or you had to do it yourself, I used to write the timestamp down in my notes if somebody said something interesting, so that I could go back and find that part in the recording. Because otherwise, it's like listening to half an hour of yourself talking can't think of anything worse.
Yeah. My own voice does get annoying. So you're at Hot Rod. How do you kind of transition to the rest of your career?
While I was at Hot Rod, Freiberger and Finnegan started what became the Roadkill Show. It was initially a part of Hot Rod magazine, and then it became its own thing. And David, he started a magazine that went with it, and he asked me if I would sort of move over from Hot Rod to Roadkill and run their magazine. So that was very cool. I got to be an editor-in-chief. I had a budget. I learned a lot more about working with freelancers. I did a lot more editing. It was beautiful. It was too beautiful to last. I'm very proud of the magazines that I put out. It was about 2 years worth of magazines. And I still think they're extremely good. They're broad. They covered things that no one else was covering. I think they're funny. I had a lot of new people come write for me. They're very diverse. It was incredible. But, nothing like that can last forever in a capitalist society. So eventually, things weren't going so great, and there were a lot of layoffs, and there was a lot of change in the print industry, and a lot of magazines got cut, including Roadkill, which I understood. I mean, we were not a money maker. We were only a money spender.
MPH was a big part of my business when it was around. So
yeah. Same idea, where it was just a team that was so excited about what they were doing, and they were really sort of broadening what automotive coverage could look like. I mean, we covered, when I was at Roadkill, we had a huge feature on Doc, which was the restoration of a B-29 bomber, and it was such a cool story, right? Not what you would normally think of as a car magazine story, but how is it not related? It is. So that was great, and I really enjoyed it. Obviously, I knew it was coming, but it was still, it hurts to be a part of a layoff. It hurts to have a project that you're working on go away, even if you understand that it had nothing to do with you. This is an industry. I mean, any kind of art or creative industry is one where you have to have a thick skin. It's not like the old days where you work at a bank from when you graduate college to when you retire and they give you a gold watch and you've been there your entire life. That's just not an expectation that you can have if this is the kind of work you want to do. Gotta be light on your feet and take the blow. Have a good cry when you go home with your little cardboard box full of stuff. And then you think about what's next. And for me, what was next was freelance. I did, I think, about 3 years of freelance. It was actually very good timing. It covered the time of the pandemic, where you would think, oh, that's a terrible time to be a freelancer. But because a lot of the corporations had very strict travel rules, the way they got around it was by hiring freelancers, where they're like, you're a freelancer. We don't care if you get a weird illness and die. You can't sue us. So I was very busy during the pandemic, and I wrote a book during that time. So, I wouldn't have been able to do that if I had had a full-time job.
What's the book?
I wrote a book about a very famous drag racer named Don the Snake Prudhomme. I wrote it with him. It was a biography. I mean, it was an amazing experience. He was down in San Diego. I would drive down there at least once a week. We'd spend a day talking about his life. He had an incredible life. For people who are not familiar with him, he was a dragster driver and then a funny car racer in the early days of NHRA. Even people who are not into cars might remember the Hot Wheels funny cars and the little models, a yellow car and a little red car. And that was an actual race team in the 70s. And Don was one of those. He was the snake. And his story is more interesting than if it was just about being in drag racing in the 60s, it would still be a good story. But it's even more interesting than that, because he grew up in Los Angeles, and he was in, came up. He was not a wealthy family. It was not, he worked hard from when he was a kid. It was not a super healthy family. He had issues with his parents. And later, much later, like when he was a full-on adult who had retired, he got into looking into his heritage, and he found out that his family is Black from Louisiana, and that his parents had moved to Los Angeles, I think in the 40s, and were passing, basically, just didn't talk about their heritage at all, and they were light-skinned, and people just sort of assumed they were, I don't know, Italian or something. LA has always been a melting pot. And that is actually a very common American story, is people moving out of areas in the South and then sort of leaving behind their heritage and their families. It's a real sacrifice to leave your entire culture behind in order to basically give your kids a better life in a very racist society. So he grew up his whole life, sometimes having people ask him about stuff, but he didn't know. He really didn't know. And so the book ended up being about more than simply drag racing. It was about a man learning about his own family and sort of reevaluating himself with new knowledge, which was pretty incredible to be a part of.
You could write a book about anything. Why did you choose this?
I would like to say that I chose this story because I knew it was an incredible story. And I did know it was an incredible story. I I had worked with Prud'homme in the past. But in fact, the story chose me because I had worked with Snake. When a publishing company asked him to do a biography, he said, I will do it, and this is the author that I want. So
Oh, that's cool.
it was very cool. It was very cool.
That's so crazy. It's funny. I keep drawing these crazy parallels between your life and my life. And you were like, oh, I wanted to. You did the shadow writing, and I was a compositor artist for a long time before I became a photographer. And it was one of those, like with NPH magazine, people would take pictures on the floor of the Detroit Auto Show. They'd send me those, and I'd put them on the streets of Detroit at night in the rain, and then someone else's name would go on it. And I'd be like, and they're like, these are amazing. I'm like, I mean. And then my father was adopted. My mother's father left her when she was 3, so I never knew my grandfather. And have you ever done the ancestry?
No. In case I want to commit crimes in the future, I try to keep my DNA off of any database.
You might be part of a crime family. That would be the. I mean, imagine if you did that and you had actual people you could go, hey guys, guess what? I'm in. Turns out you do the book. It's during the pandemic, and then what's kind of next for you? You're freelance, and then
it was a rough time. I have to say that when I was younger, I thought that adulthood was sort of like, oh, you get over some hurdles and then you get to a place and then you either kind of keep rising in salary and job importance and comfort and confidence, or, at the least you sort of ease out. But what I did not realize, and what I'm sure anybody listening will relate to, unless they are still very young and very lucky, is that life is in fact like this. You go up, you go flat, you go up, you go way down, you come back up above where you were. It's just really jagged and you don't know. And so that time period was rough. I was doing okay as a freelancer, but it's a stressful gig,
How old are you at this time?
Early 40s. So right when you feel like you should be settling, right? When culture has told you you're going to be like,
I have wisdom. I'm physically
people take me seriously. I have experience. And here I am freelancing, having to pitch editors who are 10 years younger than me and way less experienced. I'm trying to write a book, which is something I've never done before. It was definitely a learning curve. My mom gets sick and she dies. So there's this insane emotional weight and also a lot of responsibility family-wise on me at the same time as I'm trying to figure out what do I even want to do with my career. And I felt a little crushed, it was hard. I sort of just kept trucking through it. And there were some glorious things in it. One thing that is nice about freelance is that you get to do so much different stuff. And I got to do some very cool stories. I did a lot of profiles during that time period because, again, going back to the idea of having contacts, I have always tried to maintain a relationship as much as possible with people that I meet if I'm doing a story. And it's hard. One of the things about journalism that sometimes feels like being a bad person is that you're deeply invested in someone for as long as it takes to do a story. And then, they send you a note later and you're like, who the hell is that?
Story about life. I feel like that's what we do. Like you're on a job, you're like the star, everybody's calling you like, hey, you free, can you the second the job's done, everybody's like, I'm sorry, who are you?
Yeah. So from the very beginning, I've tried to keep in touch with someone. If I did a story with someone and I thought that they were interesting, I've tried to keep their phone and, their phone number in my phone. I've tried to check in on holidays or whatever, just be connected to people. And because of that, I was able to do a lot of very cool profile work while I was freelance. I did he actually just died this past weekend, but I did a profile on Bobby Allison, the NASCAR racer, where I went to his house and he tried to teach me how to fish. I was so bad at it that after we'd tried a few times, he sort of patted me gently. He was very nice. And he said, someone can teach you how to do this, but it ain't me. So we gave up fishing and went and had a beer instead. But it was, I got to do that. I went to England with another race car driver, an engine tuner named Roland Leong. Went to the only drag strip in England and got to experience that. So I got to drive a bunch of cool cars and weird things. I drove the world's fastest lawnmower. I went 116 or something on a lawnmower. It was not all bad. There's a lot of ups and downs. But during that time period, I also began doing freelance work for Car and Driver. And when they had an opening for columnists, they called me and asked if that was something that I would be interested in. And again, it was like the Freiburger call. Like, why are you even asking me? Like, you could just assume I want to do this, right? And that about a year of contributing eventually turned into a full-time job offer. And that's where we are.
You're doing people profiles. What other kind of stories are you doing? So like, maybe you can walk me through, is a story assigned to you? Are you pitching ideas for stories? How does your...
It's a real mix. As a staffer, I pick some stories. I do have a column, and that can be whatever I want it to be. I also have pretty much free reign as far as web features go. So that's just limited by budget on some level, and then also just how much time do I have. I'm constantly assigning myself something that sounds interesting, then it'll take me a year to actually get it onto the website. So apologies to anybody who's still waiting for their story. But the primary job is assignments. Car and Driver covers new cars and car news and industry news. Those are the primary things that I'm tasked with doing. Be asked, can you go and drive a prototype Honda Passport, or can you get a loan of an Accord or a Lotus Emira, or we're doing testing on these 3 supercars. Can you drive one to the test track and put in a sidebar or a blurb about it? So that, straightforward, very fun.
So you're like technically taking the car to its limits type of thing? Is it?
No, we have a test team for that.
Okay.
I get to drive with enthusiasm, but that's not my job. That's a different skill set. I think I'm a good driver. I wouldn't want to be a test driver. It's a lot of pressure, and it's also, you really have to be attentive to the small details. There's a lot of equipment that needs to be put on the car to record it, because it doesn't matter if you went super fast if there's no proof that you went super fast. One of the things that's incredible about Car and Driver is that we have this amazing test team, both in Michigan and here in Los Angeles. And so I can work with them. They'll get me numbers. They'll be like, this is the top speed. This is how it handles on a skid pad. This is how quickly it breaks from 100 to 0. So I don't have to do that, because you can't do that on the street. That's not safe. It's not responsible. It's not ethical. So instead, what I get to focus on is, how good is this car at its proposed usage? If it's a minivan, I can take it in the hills and drive it quickly, but that's not what it's meant for. What it really needs is someone to look at it and say, are the back seats comfortable? Can you get babies in and out of it? How much can you carry? Can you put the seats up and down easily? Can you do it with one arm if you're carrying groceries or a kid or a dog on a leash? That kind of thing. You really need to imagine what somebody might buy a car for, and then say, does it work for that?
So you're writing it based on the standard of what they say that it can do, and then you're kind of giving your opinion on it.
A mix, because you never know, right? Like, you could say like, oh, people buy minivans for families, but maybe people buy minivans because their band's going on tour, or maybe people buy minivans because they know they can fit a motorcycle in the back, or they like to sleep in it on camping trips. It's more about knowing, like, this is the equipment. How well is it working? You wouldn't take, say, I don't know, McLaren 720 and say, what, this car is not good because it has a very low tow rating, and it also can't fit a sheet of plywood in it, right? Like, that would be a silly complaint about that car. And the same with, if you have an F350 or something like that, you're not going to say, this thing kind of wallows a little bit when you're at the limit in the Malibu mountains. That's not how either one of those vehicles should be used. You could make a joke about that. You could try it, I always take, anytime I get a supercar or a sports car, I always take it grocery shopping, because I like to know if you could bring home groceries in it. I wouldn't ding it if you can't.
It's funny, I've seen those comments on, I'll do shoots to launch vehicles, and I'll see them, get used in editorial, and I'll just kind of see what people say, and people will be like, that Land Cruiser would be great for my wife in the parking lot of Bloomingdale. So
yeah, and it would be, because maybe it's a nice car to be seen in. It has a comfortable interior and has a very pretty software interface. So
yeah, I haven't seen the new ones. I'm so jealous. So what's like some of the favorite cars that you've gotten to ride up?
I just drove the Lotus Emira, the 4-cylinder one. And you would think like, oh, Elana, you're a muscle car person. You must have hated the 4-cylinder Lotus Emira. Like, no, I loved it. It was so fun. Like a little snorty, rowdy, imperfect, but totally perfect sports car. Like it was just so much fun to drive. I mean, you wouldn't think so. It's not even available with a manual, but it's it's a dual clutch only, like AMG 4-cylinder. But it was really fun to be in, and it was so pretty, and everybody wanted to talk to me about it, which I enjoy. I know a lot of people don't, and those people should buy the Honda Accord that I'm driving right now because no one has wanted to talk to me about it, even though it's a very nice car.
It's funny, yeah. When I heard you pull up, I was thinking I was going to hear some like rolling piping engine, and it was like this jet.
Yeah, because it's a hybrid and has an electric element. So I didn't want to sit in traffic in my junk today. Be all sweaty right now. Like,
so did it auto drive for you?
No,
you don't do that.
I drove it. I mean,
have you been in cars that?
Yeah, I've driven Cadillacs with Super Cruise, and I've been in Teslas. I'm not a fan, but other people are.
When that first came out, what were you thinking? You're like, this is never going to work, or like, there's no way I'm doing that, or
when sort of semi-autonomous driving first came out, I just was like, why do you want to do that? But it's because I like driving. And I'll tell you what I like about driving, really driving, even when it's sort of trafficky and crummy, there aren't very many things that we do in our lives where it requires some but not all of your brain. I think exercise is one. And driving is one, maybe playing music if you're really talented at it. And when you do something that's using part of your brain, using some of the physical parts and some muscle memory, it shuts off, for me anyway, it shuts off shitty bad friend part of your brain that wants to just like tear you down, remind you of all the things you've ever done that are embarrassing, interrupt your idea making. It shuts that guy down. It's busy in there and it can't poke at you. And then the only part that's left is sort of this spacious meadow of idea generation. And so I get such good ideas if I'm driving long distances. I've written stories, come up with good lead paragraphs, just had ideas for new stories. I think it's so important for me. And so if I was on semi-autonomous driving, well, then I would just be looking at my phone again or having an anxiety attack, which is what I do the rest of the time. So why is that a benefit for me?
When you write stories, where do they go? What are they for? Are they for print? Are they for online? Are they for...
Car and Driver has pretty much a finger everywhere. So sometimes I'll do video. We've done video together for Car and Driver. We've done first looks or sort of light reviews. Sometimes I will do web-based stuff. A lot of time it's web-based because the website is a hungry maw that needs constant filling. So always writing reviews or little mini features or news items that go on the website. I also have the honor to write in print, which is something that still is very beloved. Even though writing for print has so many more limitations now than writing for web, it's a shorter word count and you can't show as many photos and you can't hyperlink to things. But it's just still a thrill to me to see my name on some piece of paper. I think it's cool. I hope that people rediscover print in the future because I think it's a really nice experience. And then we also do social media stuff. So sometimes I'll do like a little video clip for our social team or just photos or something for them.
So with editorial, how does editorial generate revenue? Is it, because I know I can go to the website and then I can read your story, right? Do I have to have a subscription?
No, there's no firewall on, is that what it's called? Firewall? There's no paywall.
Okay.
There's no paywall. There's no paywall on Car and Driver. Some of the other magazines under Hearst do have a paywall. Car and Driver is available to you. I will tell you, and this is one of the secrets to my happiness. I don't know how it works.
Okay.
I do not know how it makes money. I try to never know. I've tried to go through my entire career never knowing how it makes money. I think that's someone else's job.
That's good. I mean, I feel like it would be stressful if that were my job. So how has writing evolved for you in terms of, was strictly print 2012 to like 16, and then it kind of transitioned. So what was that transition like for you?
From the beginning, because I came into the industry well within the rise of the internet, I've never worked only in print. I've always had a web component. At Hot Rod, we were pretty early on YouTube and pretty involved in social media. So it's always covered all of the different media types that we're using today, just sort of maybe in different proportions. These days, print, something has to go through a lot of levels before it'll make it to print now, because there's not very many pages. There needs to be a whole team that's like, this piece is what we want for print, or we want to assign this with print in mind initially, and then we'll take different kinds of photographs than we would if it was just for web. We'll spend more money on it than we would if it was just for web. But it's always been all of the different kinds of telling a story.
Like, I come out and we film, we do like a car review. How does that work? Like, what are the expectations out of that? Like, I know I've been there, I've filmed you, and I've heard you say things that are very negative about what we're doing. And I'm like, well, they're not looking at me and they're not looking at her. I guess this is just part of the deal. Like, how does that?
You mean negative, like about the car?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you haven't said anything negative about me, luckily, but yeah.
It's like, I don't think I've been negative to the team. One of the things that is so great about Car and Driver, one of the things that I feel very lucky being at a big outlet like Car and Driver is, at least for now, it is still an independent source of car reviews. Like, it is an actual review. And I would say that when I approach a car, I never want to just go in with negativity in mind, right? I try to go in with optimism. I hope that most things are balanced in that I can find something good to say about a car, even if there's something bad to say about it. At the same time, I also don't want to go in and be like, well, I really like this PR team. They're really nice, so I'm just going to say nothing but nice things, because that's not helpful to people. I don't ever want someone to come up to me on the street and be like, I bought a car that you said was good and it's been bad, right? One time, a guy at a hotel said, I bought a car that you reviewed and I don't like it. And I was like, oh, what was it? And I don't remember what it was. Like, it was quite a while ago too, but it was an early hybrid sedan he told me, and I was like, oh, didn't I say in the review that car wasn't very fast? And he's like, yeah, and it's not. I'm like, well, okay. I'm like, are you mad at me? He's like, no, you told me. It's like, all right.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Yeah.
You're writing, you're doing video. It seems like it's kind of changing in terms of the industry's going through some changes. How has this year been for you in comparison to like previous years with what you do?
This year's just been very busy, which is good. Although I do think it reflects maybe the overall industry's not having quite enough people to do all of the many things that need to be done. I think every outlet is working with a team that's just a little bit smaller than what it needs to do the things that it is supposed to do. Again, I'm really lucky because I have a pretty big team at Car and Driver, and even so, we're stretched because there's a lot to cover. There are a lot of different kinds of cars. There's a lot of new technology. There's a lot of motorsports. Motorsports is very popular right now, which is great for me because I love covering it. But it also means, well, okay, that's a lot of weekends you got to work. Somebody's got to go to the event. They've got to talk to race car drivers or whatever, figure out a way to explain it to mainstream car readers. It's been a very busy year externally. Anyone who's in entertainment knows that it has been a challenging year, that there's, budgets are slashed. There's not a lot of work. Everyone is concerned about AI and everyone's concerned about algorithms. There was a big Google algorithm change. So
really,
that made all of the websites have to sort of scramble to figure out, what their numbers meant. When everything's, all the numbers stuff is a little bit mysterious, but at least when it's not changing, you can compare one month to another month and say, these things were popular. Anytime that there's a big change, whether it's a social media change or a change in the way that Google promotes things, all your data is useless, right? Because you're like, oh, we had this big drop. Does it mean that we suck now? Or does it just mean that they are scrolling for something totally different and promoting something totally different? So again, that is not currently my job. It does come up in our meetings. We are aware of it. It is other people's jobs and they take it very seriously. But, it's definitely nerve-wracking because you want to do a good job. You want to give an audience something useful. But at the moment, it feels a little bit like we're all having to run through the filter of a machine. So are we talking to people? Are they getting what we're putting out there? Or do we have to talk to the machine so that the machine feeds the people what we made?
How much of what you do is data dependent?
I mean, that information, people know that information. I have actively tried to avoid learning what we're doing based off of SEO or based off of views, because I think it is unhealthy as a creator to write to a number. Obviously, I'm doing things that come to me as assignments that someone smarter than me and more aware than me has decided is a useful thing to have, 3-row SUV comparison or something like, would they know that people are looking for those things? But I'm not going to make my decisions based off of that information. Like I'll do what I'm asked to do on that, but I don't want to direct my imagination to it because I think it's really limiting.
Is there pressure on you to have a particular amount of following? Do you have to come with an audience to a magazine when you're writing stories?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think that you have to come with an audience, but I don't think that it hurts to come with an audience.
That explains everything. In terms of being active online within social, is that part of your job? Are you pressured into doing that? Is it a requirement?
There's no pressure to be online and involved with social media on a personal level from from Hearst or from Car and Driver. They're not upset about it if you are, and they're pretty good about staying out of it. There's definitely conversations that happen within a lot of corporations about how much oversight the parent company has on their employees' personal. It's not really relevant to me because most of what I post about is more classic car and car culture stuff, which generally doesn't make anybody mad. You never know. You never know what's going to make people mad. But it's not particularly incendiary. They don't pressure us to share our stories or to tag back to Car and Driver. They do ask us to make stuff for Car and Driver. And then also, if we're doing something like a big comparison of cars that aren't out yet, or something like our 10 best, where we drive everything and then decide what the 10 best cars of the year are, we will sometimes do a self-imposed social media blackout on it. Even if something is not actually embargoed, we won't post about it until the piece comes out, because it's a little bit more of a surprise. And also, who knows? We might have enemies. They might be trying to steal our ideas. So there is that kind of conversation about social media. But again, for the most part, Car and Driver's great about staying out of my personal social media, and they neither pressure me to make any kinds of posts nor criticize the posts that I'm making, which is nice.
In this industry, there's a lot of men.
What?
It's really hard to find women.
I hadn't noticed.
So how has working in a male-dominated industry affected you?
For the most part, I've had a really good experience. You would think that Hot Rod would have been a rough place to be as a girl with a lot of guys around, but it really wasn't. Freiberger wasn't that kind of boss. It felt really safe and really supportive. I liked the team there a ton. And I also felt like in the wider Hot Rod world that people were pretty cool with it. I mean, yeah, sometimes someone would be like, oh, I didn't expect to see a girl here, or, oh, you know a lot about cars for a girl, or something like that. And I could see how that would maybe take someone down a notch, but I've never been super sensitive to that kind of thing. I don't love it. I would prefer that people not interact that way, but it always seemed to be their problem and not mine. Recently, I just was reading about an engineer named Y.Y. Clark. She was a black engineer on the Apollo program.
Right, yeah.
And she was rad. I had not heard about her before, but she was really cool. But she said something which resonated with me, which was basically don't carry other people's baggage. If it's somebody else's problem, then it's their problem, and don't let it be your problem. So for the most part, I think that has been helpful. Online can be hard. People are really gross online. They're very unkind to women. They're unkind to everyone. And if you have any sort of point that they can get to, like being a woman or being a person of color or just being unusual looking, they're really going to go for that. And it can be a little bit exhausting. You just try to avoid taking that home or taking it too much to heart. Again, it's their problem. It's not my problem. With the new car stuff, again, team, no problem. Like I have not had any issue with any of the teams that I've worked for. I've never felt like I did or didn't get a job because of being a woman. Sometimes it's a little bit lonely. It's better than it used to be, but I'll still end up on a trip where it's like, I am the only girl in this room. Like, it doesn't really matter, but it's nice to have a little bit more community.
Oh yeah, definitely.
In talking to other women in the industry, I've run into women who've had much harder times, whether they've had to deal with more overt sort of sexual assault type. It's not an imaginary thing. It still happens, especially for, younger women who are maybe on the PR side or something like that. They have to deal with a lot of sort of drunk guys who have no boundaries, or just people who get their spirits crushed a little bit, maybe who don't have the support system I do. And I have an incredible support system. I have really good friends. I've been doing this a long time, well before I started doing it publicly. Like, I've been working on cars. So I am confident that I know how to talk about cars. I mean, I have to learn stuff. I get things wrong all the time. I mean, everybody does. But in a kind of deep bedrock way, I know that I belong here. For someone who maybe doesn't have that support network, it's a lot easier to kind of get knocked off your base and feel like maybe they're right and I shouldn't be doing this. I always think that it would be, it's hard to push forward. It really is. And I still have a lot of sympathy for women who are doing this and for women who are coming into it. I hope that it's better for them even than it was for me. But you do need to have a little bit of a thick skin.
It's unfortunate. There's a lot of issues, especially with like online stuff, because there's a little bit of that, like, nobody can see me. I can say whatever I want. It doesn't affect me. It's gonna be brutal.
How has AI affected what you do?
Ooh, AI. So I don't know yet how AI has affected us, right? I don't know yet. It's too new. I've had to sit in a lot of really boring meetings about it. So there's that. I resent it for that. It has ruined image searching on the internet. You cannot trust any car picture you find. You cannot trust any historical picture you find. You just don't know if it's real or if it's computer generated. You have to do so much additional research now. Whereas before you could be like, oh, what does a 1961 Lancer look like or something? And you could just like type that in and it would pop up and you'd be like, that's what it looks like. But now you really need to be like, is that an actual photo of one? Is that what has been pulled up? It's not always clear. I do not think AI is good at writing. I do not think it's good at art making. I think it's useful for things like transcription. And I don't understand why everybody wants it to replace creatives other than maybe just jealousy from software bros that they can't make stuff. I'm not really sure.
Do you use it in anything you do?
No, I find it useless. Like I use it for transcription. I mean, I don't purposely look for AI transcription, but that is what is doing computer generated transcription, which is why transcription can now be done for $3 a story when before it was like $30 a story. And I have tried it. I want to know the enemy. It does not help me with writing. It does not help me with planning a story. It definitely does not help me with research. And I think that this is really important that people understand. It makes shit up. It just makes it up. It's like the worst, most unreliable intern. An example is that I went on, I think it was ChatGPT, and I said, ChatGPT, find me a quote from Elana Scherr. I was like, this is I can fact check this, right? And it pulls up a quote, and I look at the quote, and initially I'm like, oh, that is a quote about driving cars. I look at it longer, I'm like, I don't think I would have ever, it doesn't really mean anything. I don't think I would have said it. I'm like, where's this from? And it's like, I can't tell you. It's from the internet. I'm like, well, I don't think that this is a quote from Elana Scherr, so tell me where it's from. It's like, I can't. And I'm like, it's not a quote from Elana Scherr. It's like, oh, sorry. Well, then, okay, it's not. I'm like, and so if it does that for something that I know about, then everything that I don't know about it is also doing that. So it's just,
Yeah, it's a little crazy. I actually got in a yelling match with ChatGPT. I'm gonna use it for everything. Last night because I was trying to find a link that somebody had mentioned in an interview that I had done. So I, put the transcription up and was asking, where's the YouTube link? And I was like, where does it mention YouTube? And it's like around the 110 mark. I'm like, around? Why weren't you specifically giving me a timestamp? And it's like, oh, at this mark. And I'm like, nope. I looked at it. I'm like, it's not there. And then it's like, Mike's workshop. And I'm like, no, I'm looking for like, an elderly, exercise YouTube page. And it's like, oh, it's this. And I'm like, not it either. Like, why are you making this up when I keep asking you to be specific about where this information is coming from? And then I finally tell it where the timestamp is, and it still gives me some other link. So I'm just like, it's and like the conversation keeps coming up that it has to be monitored by humans if it's going to be used, to any capacity.
well, I feel about ChatGPT similar to how I feel about autonomous driving, which is, to me, the act of developing is how you get to the final place, the act of being a part of that journey. And if you try to skip it, then the final place has no depth. And so it's not helpful to me. I would encourage other creatives to not use it for the creative part of what they're doing.
Probably good time for 10 questions.
It's time for
10 questions. Is that a yes or no, or what do you think?
10 questions.
What sparked your passion for writing about cars, motorcycles, and motorsports? Like, was there a specific moment where you were like, this is it?
It was not a specific moment, but it was a specific year, which was I bought a car, I learned how to drive, I had to learn how to fix it. I did not understand what I was doing, so I started reading about it, and I didn't understand what I was reading, but I just kept reading about it. And at the end of a year, I understood what I was reading, and that was this incredible feeling where I was like, these writers made me understand something, and I want to do that for other people.
What's one story you wrote that ended up being a way bigger deal than you'd ever thought it would be?
Okay, no, I do have one that was a surprise, which was that I went to a place called Old Cars USA, which is a junkyard out in Georgia, maybe. I went there it was a C7 Corvette. We did a photo shoot out there, and then I just went through and looked at all of these old cars that are like old muscle cars with like trees growing out of them. And I took a lot of photos and talked to the guy who owned the place, and he was really interesting and kind of a quirky guy, like make a little art piece on a styrofoam cup every morning when he finished his coffee, and he had this like room full of styrofoam cups with art on them. And that story it was like a pretty early viral story, and it got picked up by like a lot of different other websites, and it still gets picked up today. I still see it sometimes. Oh, this one's pretty good. When the last Viper ACR came out, I did a story which basically was like, I want this car so bad, but it cost so much that I would have to live in it because I couldn't afford a house. And so I went on basically like a camping trip with the ACR, and there's a photo of me asleep on the wing because the engineers were like, oh, it can support 1,000 pounds of downforce. It can definitely support a person. And so I have like a little sleeping bag and like snoozing. And it was shot by Larry Chen, who's an incredible photographer, amazing automotive photographer. And he was pretty early in his career. I was pretty early in mine. And he told me once that photo, I don't know if it still is, but it was his most stolen photo.
Really?
Yeah, just like all over the web with no credit to Larry or me. But that was another one where it really, and people were mad. They were mad that I was on that wing. They were like, you're ruining that car. I'm like, you don't understand physics, man.
That's funny. How do you approach writing about classic cars versus new models?
When you're writing about a new model, you have a lot of information that is just right there in front of you. I mean, there will literally be a spec sheet and a press release that is like, this is what is new about this car. This is how it all works. These are the options that you can get. When you're writing about a classic car, especially if it's a modified car, you have to do a lot more interaction with people to find out the information. You know, if you're lucky, they wrote down what they did to the car, but you need to know what kind of modifications people do so that you can ask if those modifications have been done. You need to know a lot of aftermarket companies because somebody will say something like, oh, yeah, it's got a Bauer's blower. And you're like, if you don't know what that is, it requires a lot more research going into it and a lot more fact checking afterwards.
What's been your favorite car or motorcycle you've had the chance to test or write about?
Viper, the last generation Viper I would buy one in a second if I could afford one. I love that car so much.
What was like the thing that...
I have a lot of classic cars. I mostly drive classic cars when I'm not testing new cars. I mean, I love them, but like it's a lot. It's a commitment when you're in an old car. They don't have, most of them, at least mine, most of them don't have air conditioning, and they certainly don't have phone connectivity. They don't have like backup cameras or anything like that. But then when I get in new cars that have all of that, a lot of times I feel bored, like just like driving a refrigerator around. And the Viper for me was like right in the middle of that. It had air conditioning. You could Bluetooth a phone so you could get directions to where you're going. But it was also really raw and gorgeous. It's still a gorgeous design car. It just looks so beautiful. It looks beautiful from the outside, looks beautiful from the inside. You can kind of like see the fenders as you're driving it. You can see the flanks in the back, or if it has the wing, you can see the wing. It's a car where you get out of it and you look back at it, and there's not so many that are like that, where you still have to put in the work to drive it safely and quickly, but it also does have some creature comfort. So I would love to have one. I had when I was at Roadkill, we had a long-termer because Roadkill had done a Dodge event, and when I had to give it back, I cried. I should have bought it.
That's fine. It's cool. It's cool that it's like an extension of yourself. You know, it's like you're like, ooh, it's me 2.0 type of thing. Yeah.
I mean, I wish. Viper is how I would like to be seen. In reality, I'm probably more of like a Fiat 500.
That's the great way to describe it. How do you balance technical accuracy with storytelling in your automotive features?
Technical accuracy is crucial. Like, it's really, really important. And it's hard. You know, I do make mistakes. I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about people's names that I spelled wrong and how embarrassed I am about it. You know, I just recently was writing something and I was like, is that how you spell Juneau, Alaska? Like, how embarrassing is it to misspell Juneau, Alaska? With Car and Driver, and actually at Hot Rod as well, we did have an internal process. So things like numbers, which I do tend to switch around, slightly dyslexic maybe. There is someone who checks it. We have a fact-checking process. We have a copywriting process. I have a safety net, which is incredible. Most people don't. Most outlets do not have much of maybe they have an edit process, but they don't have all of the steps. And I'm really lucky that I do, because they'll catch stuff, you know, like you think that you know a movie quote, but you didn't look it up and you don't have the movie quote correct or whatever. That stuff is important. You get a little thing wrong and then nobody trusts everything else that you wrote.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned about the automotive industry during your career?
The most surprising thing that I've learned, honestly, is how many people are just doing that as a job. And I mean, I think that's probably the case for a lot of the arts or a lot of creativity. I mean, there are some really incredible people in the industry, but there are also a lot of people who are just in this to go on press trips and eat free shrimp, and they'll write whatever's in the press release, and then they go home and drive their press car. They don't own their own car. I think that's wild. It's not fair. That's not fair to me. I have no work-life boundaries. I do cars on the weekends. I go to races whether or not I'm being paid to do it. My husband and I, all we talk about are cars and maybe dogs. So I wouldn't necessarily demand that everyone do it the way that I do it, but I am surprised by that there are as many people as there are who they couldn't care less. They could be writing about cars or houseplants or furniture. It's all the same to them.
Interesting. How has social media influenced the way you share and promote automotive stories?
It's been really useful to have Instagram. It's less useful than it used to be because they've changed sort of the the algorithm and you can't necessarily know if something's going to reach out. But in the earlier days of social media, I would fully find stories on Instagram or Facebook. Like I would say, oh, I'm going to Tokyo. Does anybody have a cool car I should see? And people would write in and be like, I do. And you should come talk to this guy, or I know this guy. And I'm like linking you guys so that you can get together. And I still use it that way a little bit, not as much as I used to, because it just doesn't get the reach that it once did. I try to share stories that I did on social media. I don't know that it makes a huge difference in people going back to read them. Something that is hard for me is, because of the way that I was brought up and the generation in which I was brought up, is to brag about what I've done. It feels outrageously uncool. Like when, I kind of grew up in a time where like you would go to a concert for a band you really liked and everybody would stand like this. And if you like maybe did this, that was like showing a lot of enthusiasm. And I don't like that. I like enthusiastic people, but I do have to kind of get over that hump and be like, I did a cool thing. It's good for the people that I did it with for you to see this. I want to give them credit for helping me. I want to tag them, and I want you to see it. So that's kind of how I try to use social to promote stuff.
What's the most memorable challenge you've faced while covering a motorsport event?
Oh, I have a good one. I mean, there's a lot, because motorsports events can be pretty gnarly. But I was at Hot Rod, and I was going down to cover a race in Baja. It was not the Baja 1000. It was a vintage version of that called the Nora 1000. And I had a friend who was like, oh yeah, I have a team that is excited to do this story with you, and you can embed with this team. Just get yourself to Ensenada. So I get myself to Ensenada, which I think I'd been to maybe once as a kid, but like, I don't know my way around Mexico. I speak a small amount of Spanish, but not enough. So I'm in Ensenada. I run, I do meet up with the guy, and he's like, cool, let's go to this party where all the teams are. So we go to the party, and he brings me up to this guy named Jim. And he's like, Jim, this is Elana. She's the writer that's going to be riding along with your team. And Jim looks at me, and I can see in his eyes that is the first he has heard of it. But I mean, to his credit, he rallied fast, and he was like, yeah, absolutely. Meet us here in the morning, and it wasn't really until once we were kind of deep in it, because it was a week-long thing. And once we were deep in it, it was pretty clear to me that they had shuffled all their hotel rooms so that I would have a hotel room and a bed and stuff. Like they'd moved, their team guys were sharing, or people were on couches that maybe wouldn't have been if I hadn't been there. They were so generous and so kind about it. But it was a wild event, because I was deep in Mexico with people I had never met before in my life. I rode in the race car. We crashed the race car. We rebuilt the race car in the sands of Bay of LA. It was physically demanding. We had no sleep. It was emotionally demanding, because there was a lot of interaction with people, and a lot of, things weren't going well. But it was a really incredible experience, and one of my favorite stories that I wrote.
That's crazy. Yeah, one of my most memorable set, I've covered Baja 3 or 4 times, and every time it's always like, oh my God, I'm going to be shooting for 24, 48 hours straight. It's totally nuts. My first experience was Racer Magazine put me in a side-by-side with Ryan Millen, Rod Millen's son, to go. I didn't know they were pre-running. They're like, oh, they're going to go look, check it out, go with them. And they wanted me to kind of see where would be some cool places to shoot, when we go back. And I had no idea. I kind of packed a shoulder bag with my camera gear in it, feeling be loose with a sleeping bag or whatever. I had no idea I would be in goggles, in a helmet, in dirt, all day long. I'm like, you can't record or film anything in that. My gear was flying out of I think I broke everything I owned.
Yeah. Oh, and then just all the grit in it and pulling cactus thorns out of yourself. It's I think that Baja is at least one of the most physically demanding events that I've ever covered.
What's the craziest comment or letter you've ever received from a reader about one of your stories?
I used to get a lot of prison mail.
That's crazy.
And they were always very long and very sort of well-intentioned and very sad. They were never rude because I think they get censored, so that wouldn't make it out. So those are probably the weirdest ones.
That sounds very shocking. If you could drive or ride any vehicle from history, what would it be and why?
Oh, wow. Anyone from history. Like back in that time period or right now?
Anytime. Anything, even if it doesn't exist anymore. Like what would you want to go back and...
I mean, it would be very cool to drive one of like the very early cars. I mean, there is a recreation, I think, or maybe the actual one still exists of the very first car, the Mercedes, the three-wheeler. And I know other people have driven it, so that would be pretty cool. There are definitely some race cars that I would like to get in, although I don't think that I could do them justice.
Why in particular the Mercedes three-wheeler?
I think that it's super exciting to drive a really old car. Last year, my husband and I bought a 1915 Dodge touring car. And I'd never been into like antique cars. I've always been into kind of like muscle cars and newer. But once we got it, it was so fun to drive because it's a lot of work. It's not like normal, like a hand throttle and a different shift pattern. And you kind of have to, clutch differently than you do in a normal car. And it's got wood wheels and it doesn't go that fast, but it feels incredibly fast. You gotta like decide, all right, I have like 2 presses of the brake within, a half-hour period or whatever. When am I going to use them? I feel like learning how to drive it was, I don't know, like kind of a confidence boost in a way, and also just an incredible feeling of connection to the people who started what I do now, right? Like that car is, what is the math, like 109, something like that. And someone bought it and they were probably the first person in their town to have a car. So that's cool.
I like going back and seeing those videos where they colorize something from like way back in the day, and it's just a camera out the back of a car, and you see people looking at cars like they're aliens on the street. I mean, it's so crazy.
Yeah.
10 questions!
Is there anything you wish you could go back and tell yourself, knowing what you know now?
There's so much that I wish I could redo. I think the number one thing, and it's funny because again, talking about people in the past, I was watching a documentary about the motorcycle racer Mary McGee, who was the first woman to ride road course motorcycles, and she did like the Baja 500 solo, like Iron Woman. She's 97, I think, in this documentary. But she said that when she first started racing, she told herself she was just always going to say yes to things. I think I turned down a lot of opportunities because I felt like I wouldn't do I was worried I would embarrass myself by not being good at it. But everyone has to be bad at it initially. Unless you are so bad that someone dies, no one will remember that you were bad at it. So I always tell younger people who are getting into this, like, if someone gives you a chance to drive a car, just say yes. Like, you don't have to drive it fast. No one will know if you drove it fast. But at the end of the day, the next day, you can say, I drove a, 1963 NASCAR. Like, they don't need to know that you stayed in first gear and just went around the block. You still did it, right? And I wish that I had told myself that, because I can think of some, like early on, I turned down a chance to do a top speed run at an airport because I was just nervous that I wouldn't do it right. And it's like, I could have done it. Like, maybe I wouldn't have got the top speed, but I should have done it. I did it, right? Like, even if other people go 201 and you go 189, you still went 189.
It's true.
And that can be the part of the story that you tell. So that's my big regret, is that it took me so long to stop worrying that I was going to be bad at things. And now I'm just like, I'm going to be bad at this. I'm going to do it.
What advice would you have for somebody that's looking to be a writer in automotive?
I would say that anybody who's coming into this industry now needs to be more well-rounded. You can't focus on just being a writer. You should have some photography skills. You should have some on-camera skills. You should have some behind-the-camera skills. I mean, I don't even take all this advice. For example, I hate self-shooting. I hate it. Like if you ask me to go and shoot a video where there is no videographer with me, I'm going to say no. I don't want to do it.
I mean, it's a nightmare just to do your lines with me there. Like to have to do that with, it's another thing. Like, I mean, it's a nightmare having to set this up and then like think like, I want to be engaged in what we're doing and not worry about like the time and then make sure things is working.
Yeah.
Like,
but if you can do it, it's an incredibly useful skill. So, to at least have familiarity with as many forms of media storytelling as possible, we will be hugely helpful.
Where can people find you? Where can people find where you're at online?
All right. If people are not completely sick of me by now, they can find me at Car and Driver. I have a author's bio page, and I've pretty much got a story up there every week. They can find me in the Car and Driver magazine. They can occasionally find me in the Road and Track magazine. Sometimes they'll share. And then on social media, I'm on Instagram as Challenge Her, and I'm on YouTube as Challenge Her.
That's cool. So why the Challenger? I'm just curious.
Oh, so it was really my second car, but it was my first more performance car, was a Dodge Challenger, the old Dodge Challenger. This was a 72. And then I bought a 70. So I still own the 1970 Dodge Challenger. And I did a lot of cool stuff in that car. So I raced it a bunch, and it was on Top Gear, the Top Gear America, Top Gear USA, with like Tanner Faust and Rutledge Wood drove it. And I commuted in it back and forth to Hot Rod and El Segundo like for 3 years in it. And it's had a bunch of different engines and stuff like that. The car, Challenger, and then because I'm a girl, it's Challenge Her.
Given the process that editorial goes through now, and it's been doing it forever, is there anything you would change about the current process?
I mean, I am jealous of anyone who got to write for magazines in the 70s and 80s, before everyone's attention was split across numerous different ways of telling a story. You could really focus. I mean, first of all, you had all these pages, which meant that you had all these words. And, all the stories that we think of as being like kind of the highest points of automotive journalism, those guys had like a month in a Ferrari and like 10 grand to spend, like I could also write a good story with a month in a Ferrari and 10 grand. I mean, I hope. And that's just a world that we are not working in anymore. So, we have to write an engaging story in, 1,200 words where they used to have 10,000 words. And that's a really different way of doing it. I'm glad to be there, and I'm glad to be doing it, but I'm definitely jealous of being able to, take 3 new cars down to Mexico for 2 weeks and then just write about what happens.
Hopefully that's the next documentary on Netflix with you. I would watch that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for your time. Thank you for opening up and telling your story. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. I hope that it is helpful to someone, or at least not boring to everyone.
And that's a wrap.
Yay!
Just fix it in post.